Okay, this week, just for a change, we're going to make a cable. And I'm hoping to do a series of these with different connectors so that you can see how different connectors are soldered on. Hopefully help you DIY your own cable and see how we make ours here. This week we're doing 4.4 balanced to two 3-pin XLRs, and we're doing it the right way with 6 wires so that it's fully grounded. Unlike the 4-wire ones or 8-wire ones that you see on eBay that sometimes cause a bit of hum on some amplifiers, this is going to be a fully balanced bad boy. Let's go. Morning people, today we're going to start a new series of how to solder connectors / make audio cables, because there's loads of different connectors and a lot of people like to make their own DIY cables. So we're going to have a look at some of the more popular ones, make ourselves some nice cables. Obviously we here at Custom Cans make cables to order, so if it's something you don't fancy doing yourself, you can get us to make it for you. But you know, it's always good to DIY things, learn how things work. So today we're going to be making a cable to go from a 4.4 balanced player, like an iFi balanced DAC or something like that, to 2 3-pin balanced XLRs. And let's have a look. So on a 4.4 we have left plus, left minus, right plus, right minus, ground. And on the XLRs we've got plus, minus and ground. So we've got 2 ground wires going to the sleeve and then the plus and the minus going to them to create a fully balanced one that's properly grounded, because some amplifiers get a bit fussy and you'll get a bit of hum if you only get a 4-wire. So multiples of 5 is what we're looking for, or 6 in this case because we've got 2 grounds. I have my minions have prepared some wire for me. They've wrapped it in paracord. Now then, for this I'm going to be using lit wire, which is what we make our cables from. I'm going to be using silver solder, which is, they're both terrible to use. I would advise, if you're doing this as a DIY, just use normal wire, use silver plated copper or copper. It's easy to get hold of. Lits is a real bugger to solder, so only do that if you're really good at soldering. But the theory is going to be the same. We're going to solder the wire together, we're going to make a nice braided cable. Yeah, let's go for it. Right, so we're going to have to start off by preparing this a little bit. Now then, with these 4.4s, even if we drill out the hole a little bit on the back, we're not going to fit 6 wires in there, which is what we're going to need for this cable. For a 4-wire cable, you can just about get 4 strips of paracord through there. We use 550 paracord, but yeah, so the hole isn't quite big enough to take all 6. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a bit of shrink tube to neck this down, so we've just got the actual lits wire going in there, and it's also going to give the lits a bit of protection against the edge here, which is rubbing on it, so it doesn't sort of rub over time. So let me just grab a bit of shrink tube. Alright, so I'm just going to get a short length like that. Going to line all these ends up. And what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to put a dab of hot glue on them to join them all into one unit. So if one gets pulled, it can't come loose because it's glued to all the others. So I'm just gonna squish those into a. Okay, and now I'm gonna pop a bit of shrink over here. And if you're following along at home, I'm making a paracord covered cable like we're doing here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a bit of length here, we're going to solder it on, and then we're going to pull the wires back through to pull this down onto the end of our paracord. Just going to make life a little bit easier in the long run. Right, so that's on there. I'm going to shrink that down. And where we've put the glue on the ends, the glue's going to remelt as the shrink tube goes on, and it's going to glue all the bits of wire to the shrink tube as well. Move that up a bit before it glues. What I'm trying to get is get the end piece here to kind of neck down small enough to get into that hole. It's just about right, but I'm just going to hit it up a little bit more. There we go. So now when we pull the wire back through, it should go up there, and then this piece of shrink tube is going to protect the internal wire from rubbing against the inside of this as it moved around over time. Like we give a 2-year warranty on our cables, so we have to try and make sure they're going to last 2 years where possible. Otherwise it gets quite expensive for repairs. Don't get me wrong, some stuff still breaks within those 2 years, but we do everything we can at this end to ensure that it's going to last right. I'm just pulling through the wires a little bit just to give me a bit of length at the other end, because when you braid it you don't want to get to the other end and then find out you haven't got enough wire. So I'm just going to trim all these back. Alright, cool. So as I said, we're using silver solder, which is a bit trickier than standard solder. So yeah, just normal solder if you're starting out, and then silver solder once you get the hang of that, because it needs a much higher temperature and it's not as easy to get it to stick to things. I'm just going to widen out the cable clamp just to kind of get it out of the way temporarily. Actually, I might just snip that off because we don't need to clamp these. We don't want to clamp these wires because the cable clamp might kind of eat through them and cause a short in the future. So what I've got is I've got some flux here, which can't hurt. I'm going to put a little bit of flux on each of the contacts. So flux basically helps spread the heat, helps transfer the heat from the soldering iron or the solder to the part, which helps the solder stick. Because if you don't have the part hot enough, the solder will just come away. So you need to hold the soldering iron on there long enough so that the part you're soldering it to is also, the surface of it is up to temperature so that the solder melts nicely into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these wires in turn. Ours is silk covered lits, so I have to remove a bit of the silk wrap. Actually, to remove, if you were using normal wire, obviously you'd use wire strippers and strip away the outer coating a little bit. Okay, I'm just gonna tin the end. So with lits, again, it's a bit trickier. You need to get a little bubble of solder on the end of your soldering iron and hold it to the end. Oh, I've had too much coffee this morning, look, my hand's shaking. I think it's also the awkward angle that I'm sat at so that the camera can see what I'm doing. Yeah, this is not going to be as easy as it usually is. Our wire again, because it doesn't have a normal outer coating on, will get incredibly hot as you solder it. So I'm going to just use some micro manipulators. I'm going to get some fresh solder on my soldering iron, and I'm going to join that to the ground. I'm going to repeat the same thing again with the other ground wire. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to just mark all these wires so that we know which one's which at the other end. So I'd advise you to do that first. Either use different coloured wires internally or use a marker pen to mark the ends of the wires, because when we come to the braiding bit you need to figure out which is left and which is right and which is ground. You can use a multimeter for that, but it just saves a bit of time if you mark it first. Right, so those are both joined on there, both soldered on relatively nicely. There we go. That is fabulous. Hi, this is future Jason, and what past Jason didn't realise is that he was a real idiot and he forgot to put the bomb on the thing first, and when he realises, he's gonna be gutted. Anyway, back to the show. And then what I'm gonna do, just because this tab is a little bit flexible, if someone were to yank on the cable that may bend and it may jump up and touch one of these contacts, I'm just gonna pop a little bit of PTFE tape over that, just plumber's tape, which is made of Teflon and not conductive. Like, the chances of this happening are quite low, but again, if you want it to last, it can't hurt. You put in a bit of shrink or some PTFE tape over it. And as I said, we want our cable to last for years and years and years and years, but we offer a 2-year warranty and it's worldwide. So if someone in Australia's cable breaks, it suddenly gets quite expensive for us to sort it out for them. So we're pretty keen on it being good, ideally. Right, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tin these other contacts. I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on them. It's going to make joining the wires to them in the next stages a little bit easier. Whoop. Yeah, I might need to change my soldering tip. This one's too fine for this job, I think. Yeah, I'm going to go and get a fatter soldering tip in a second. So actually this one is great for very fine jobs. It doesn't have a lot of thermal mass, so it doesn't hold a lot of heat in the tip. So when you touch it to the metal thing, it cools down, making the soldering more difficult. So yeah, so I'm going to go and change the tip, and then I'm going to finish this off because that's not quite right. Okay, right, so I've got that sorted now. Then what's happened, I don't know if you can see this on the video, but where I was using the wrong solder tip and it was all going a bit wrong, I've bridged between this and this, so I need to remove that solder. So I need to resolder this whole thing. It's all gone a bit wrong with that solder tip, but let's hope this sorts out. But what I've got is this super sexy Japanese solder sucker. It's a thing of great beauty. Costs twice as much as a normal one, but my gosh, it's a beautiful thing. Hey, a little bit more. There we go. So that's sucked that solder off. Yeah, so I'm just getting a little dab of solder on each of these. Oh my god, this new tip is so much nicer. Yeah, don't go for a super skinny tip if you don't need it. What you can do is put a bit of tape over the thread there and it stops that from happening. I'm just being stupid / lazy here. Okay, right, so now we have a bit of solder on all of these and we're going to solder on the wires. And what I've done is, as you can see, I've put a little bit of Sharpie on here, a bit of permanent marker pen to denote the left and the right and the ground. It's going to really help us when we get to the other end, which I've marked the other end as well. So do that. Make sure you mark your ends. Otherwise you'll be scrabbling around with a multimeter trying to figure out which wire's which. Oh, you know what I've gone and done? All this videoing, I haven't been paying attention. I forgot. I forgot to put that bit on first. Oh, sad times, sad times. So what I've got to do. Anyway, that shows you how to solder it. What I've got to do is unsolder it, pop this back on and then solder it all together. I might just get a new connector because once these have been soldered once, it's pretty much knackered. So leave it with me. I'm going to grab another one of these. I'm going to unsolder, put this on, solder it all back up, and then we're ready for the next stage. Oh man, oh, it's the worst thing that can happen. Okay, right. That was fun. Right. Yeah, don't do that. Always make sure you put this bit on first before you solder the wires on. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. Unless you've got thin wires that you can slide on from the other end. But anyway, as we can see, what we're dealing with here is we have a blob of solder, meow, and we have a thread which we don't want to get solder on, meow. So I'm going to wrap that in a bit of tape, which we shall remove in the future. So yeah, a bit of PTFE tape on there will stop solder from sticking. Again, if you're using normal solder and normal wire, you might not need to do this because it's a bit easier, but Lits and silver solder, they are not bestest friends. There we go, that's all held in place. As you can see, I've got PTFE underneath it as well, so it can't short to the contact underneath. And that's pretty much on there. And then I have managed to get it pretty close. I'm just going to trim that away with the scissors just to make sure that doesn't cause issues. Because when you screw this back together, you don't want that touching the metal body of the thing, so otherwise it will short on that as well. So I'm just going to neaten that up a bit, and then we'll go on to the next stage. Okie pokey, right, now we have our wires attached to there. I'm going to give it one more thing of PTFE, just for good what's-its. Hold it all in there. Right, okay. Now, what we want to achieve is for this necky bit, so that to be down on there. So what's going to be the easiest way? Oh yeah, I'm going to screw, so you can tell I don't make cables that often. I'm going to screw that on, so that is screwed on there, and then I'm going to pull these wires back through until that is onto there. There we go, so now we've got the end of the shrink tube up the bum of the connector. I assume that part's called the bum. It makes me laugh every time I say it. Right. Okay, so there we have that. I'm just going to warm up the glue gun and we'll shrink over the top of that so that this can't get pulled out again. It all becomes one unit. Give me a moment. I'm just going to grab some more shrink tube. Yeah, because I need it to shrink down quite small to get into there, so I need to start off with as small a shrink as I can get. So that will fit over there just. Okay, I'm going to trim that to length because I want it to come down to roughly where that other shrink ends. Okay, I've got enough heat in my glue gun. So I'm just putting a bit of glue around there, which will join the two bits together, and I'm going to put just a smear, just because the shrink tube only just fits over that. I'm just going to put a smear down the side of that. And when we heat up the shrink to shrink it all down, the glue will melt and should all become one. To become one. That's what the Spice Girls was singing about. It was just joining bits of shrink tube together. Right, so we got that there. Here's my top tip. You'll notice it's all lumpy where the glue is. But if we hit it with the hot air gun, you get it hot enough, all that glue is going to turn to liquid and smooth out and become unlumpy. If unlumpy is a word. So I'm just going to start shrinking that down. I've got the hot air gun set to 200 degrees, so there you go, we've got a big old lump there, can you see that? I'm going to just keep heating that. Oh, you can see it smoothing out. Yeah, I've got the hot air gun set to 200, which is enough to shrink this and melt the glue, but just shy of melting the paracord, so when we shrink it together, hopefully the paracord doesn't melt. If you've got a temperature controlled hot air gun, if it doesn't have a readout, I'd start off coolish and build up the heat gradually. You want to get just hot enough to shrink the shrink tube, but not go crazy. Alright, so we're going to shrink. If it's a bit wonky at this point while it's still hot, you can kind of, maneuver it into shape, and then when it's cool it'll be nice and straight, but that's not too bad. Cool. Right, so now we have a 4.4 attached to 6 wires. Whoo! That's the tough bit. Next we've got to braid it, then attach the other ends on. And what you will remember is that we mark the other end. So as you're braiding it, when we get to the point where we've got to split it into two to go to the 2 XLRs, we want to have 2 lefts and a ground and 2 rights and a ground on the other side. So we've marked them all. It should make that easier. Okay, right, on to the braiding. Right, okay, so now we have our 6 wires in here and we want to braid them. And we generally do a flat braid, as it gets the cores as far apart as possible. So to do this with 6, what you're going to have to do is take the outside one, go over 2 wires. Take this one out, go over 3. So over 2, over 3, over 2, over 3. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. 2, over 3. Oh, there you go, it's coming together now. This guy wants it to split after about 30 centimeters into the 2 XLRs, so we're going to do this. Get so far, and then what you want to do is pull out some of the threads, because otherwise you get all tangled up. With 4 this is a bit easier, 6 it gets a little bit cumbersome. Okay, so let's continue the pattern, over 3, 2, over 3, over 2. And I'm sure if you try this, it won't be nearly as easy as I'm making it look. My fingers have done this many times. I have muscle memory, makes it easier. Just being careful not to get them all tangled up. See, that's looking sexy. And to kind of even it up, I'm just running my hands up and down it, and that'll release any that are tenser than others, so you get a nice flat braid. Okay. Alright, so I've just moved it back into the vise to the point at which we want to split it, and now I need to start thinking about which wires go together. So I'm just having a look at the other end and see where we've marked them. Look at that, first time, 2 blues and a black, that's what we want. So that's two lefts and a ground. So those 3 go together, and these 3 go together. So now we're just going to do a standard kind of 3 braid. Now then, we don't put splitters on. You could put a Y splitter on there. We don't, because we want the wires to be able to move around. So if you yank on one, it can spread the force all the way down the cable and make it less likely to break. It's not quite as neat looking, but it makes them last longer. And obviously it saves weight. You don't want extra weight on your cables and extra points of failure if you can avoid them. So again, just going to have to braid this all the way down. Okay, now we got that all braided. I'm going to just add a dab of hot glue so it doesn't come undone again. Hold them all together. Yeah, so that's that. Alright, and then rinse and repeat on the other side. Alrighty then. So we have our cable all braided. And after the debacle earlier, I'm definitely going to make sure I put the bums on first. Just trimming back the paracord a bit, careful not to cut the wire. Just kind of evening it up. Now I'm going to trim those down. Don't forget the bum. Just because there's fluffy bits on the paracord, it makes it a bit easier if you put a bit of tape around them, PTFE tape, because it's not sticky, so it won't leave any residues. I can just slide that over. Okay, now what I want to do is tin the ends. So I'm just going to get a bit of solder on the wires ready. Then we're going to use the multimeter to figure out which one's plus, minus and ground. Now then obviously if you'd marked all your cables extra carefully as to which one was plus, minus and ground, you'd be sorted, or you used all different coloured wires. That would make it much easier. But you know, it only takes a minute with the multimeter. Okay, so I can tin a bit more on these because it's a bigger connector. I'm not worried about it shorting, so I can tin a bit further up the wire. Give myself a millimetre or two of soldered kind of tinned area. And you might be noticing the black crustiness that I'm getting on here. That's the enamel burning off the Litz wire, which can mess up your solders a bit. But as long as you've got it kind of all covered in solder, you'll be alright. Okay, so we've got those tinned. I'm just going to now test whether they are left or right. So if you remember, it was pin 1 and 2 are left. So the tip and the next one down are left. So let's see, is this left? So this is left. So this one's the ground, because it's connected to the sleeve on the jack. Okay, so the ground wants to go to pin 1. So it's much easier working with this style connector, just because you've got a nice big cup for the wire to go into, and then you can fill that with solder. Oh, so much nicer than working with those little 4.4s, and the 2.5s are probably even worse. So I'm just going to heat that up with a soldering iron and just flood that with solder. I know this isn't like the bigger the glob, the better the job, but something just satisfying about filling it up. and it means your wire's fully in there. Right, okay, so next we want to find the positive, which will be pin 2. So again, just filling that with solder, making sure that I heat up the connector and the wire, so that you get a good solid connection. And then obviously by a process of deduction, this last wire should be the negative. It is. This is hole 3. So again, just heating, feeding in solder. You'll see it all kind of sucks in nicely. Right, so that's attached. And then we want to slide, oh yeah, this is the chuck, and when we tighten it up, this will clamp down with its little teeth there around the paracord to kind of hold it all in there. Stop you from being able to yank it out. It lines up with some little grooves in the end of the connector. And you want to put this bit on, and it's got a notch out of one side, so it'll only go on one way round. You need to find the right way around. There you go, so that's all fully in. Let me slide up this bit, tighten it up. Tighten it all the way down, just so this is thoroughly in there. So that's one side done, and what I have got is a little red ring for the other side, which we're going to have as right. So on the bum on that one, just pop that on there, and then we'll know that that's right. And then it's always worth just giving it a final test at the end just to make sure that everything is correct. So they're all connected, and I just want to make sure there's not a bridge. No bridges. Perfect. Perfect. Cool. There you go. That wasn't too bad. So there we go. 4.4 to fully balanced XLR. The only tricky bits really were getting the 4.4. The soldering to that is quite close together, so it's easy to bridge it if you're not careful. As you saw, I used a bit of PTFE tape. You could use shrink tube, something like that. I just found the tape a bit easier, and it works for us. So if you've got any questions, stick them in the thing. It was really great hanging out. I'd love it if you could give me a thumbs up, and if you want to see more of this kind of thing, or you think of DIYing a cable yourself, this is probably a useful series to watch. So so get subscribed and hit the bell and press all the various buttons and stuff so that you know. Anyway, loving your work.